The studio lights blazed hot and unforgiving as Julian Brenner adjusted his silk tie, his jaw set in that familiar expression of controlled confidence. He had built an empire from nothing, transformed a small coding startup into quantum innovations, a tech giant worth billions. He had faced hostile board meetings, survived market crashes, and outmaneuvered countless competitors. But tonight, sitting across from renowned journalist Patricia Huang on the most-watched evening program in the country, he felt a tremor of something he rarely experienced: fear. Good start. I need to establish Julian's character, powerful, confident, but about to make a terrible mistake. I'll continue building the scene and introduce the key elements. The question about his daughter, his denial, and the impact it will have. Patricia leaned forward, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp as broken glass. The red recording light blinked steadily, broadcasting this moment to 17 million viewers across the nation. Behind the cameras, producers held their breath. This interview had been scheduled to discuss the groundbreaking new quantum computing chip that Julian's company had just unveiled. Instead, it had become something else entirely. "Mr. Brenner," Patricia began, her voice steady and professional, "before we discuss your company's innovations, I think our viewers deserve clarity on a personal matter that has dominated social media for the past 72 hours. Multiple sources have come forward claiming you have a 6-year-old daughter named Helafera, a daughter you have kept hidden from the public eye. Is this true?" Julian felt his heart hammer against his ribs. In the green room backstage, his father Theodore had been explicit in his instructions. The Brenner name could not afford scandal. The company's stock was already volatile. Investors were nervous. Any admission of a secret child, especially one born outside of marriage, would destroy everything they had built. His current girlfriend, the stunning socialite, Vivian Ashford, had made her position equally clear: acknowledge this child, and their relationship was over. "Patricia," Julian said, forcing his trademark smile, the one that had charmed investors and closed billion-dollar deals, "I understand there are always rumors surrounding public figures. People create stories, seek attention, try to profit from false claims." He paused, looking directly into the camera, knowing that somewhere in the city, in the modest apartment he secretly paid for, his daughter might be watching. "But I need to be absolutely clear. I do not have a daughter. I have no children. These allegations are completely fabricated." The words left his mouth like stones dropping into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond what he could imagine. In that modest apartment across the city, Helafera sat on the worn carpet, her small legs crossed beneath her, her enormous green eyes fixed on the television screen. She was a delicate child, with hair the color of honey and sunlight, and a smile that could light up entire rooms. But tonight that smile had vanished. Her nanny, Mrs. Chen, sat beside her on the couch, one hand covering her mouth in shock. "He said I'm not real," Helafera whispered, her voice so small it barely registered above the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "Daddy said I don't exist." Mrs. Chen reached for the child, but Helafera stood abruptly, her hands clenched into tiny fists at her sides. Around her, the air seemed to shimmer slightly, the way heat creates mirages on summer pavement. The drawings she had taped to the walls, colorful pictures of butterflies and flowers and fantastical creatures, began to flutter as if touched by an invisible breeze. It was happening again, that strange thing that occurred when Helafera's emotions ran too strong, when her imagination and reality blurred at the edges. "Sweetheart," Mrs. Chen said gently, kneeling beside her, "your father loves you. He's just confused right now. Adults sometimes make terrible mistakes when they're scared." But Helafera was no longer listening. She walked to her bedroom, her small feet padding softly on the carpet, and closed the door with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than any slam. Mrs. Chen pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed. The only number she could think of. The number Julian had given her for emergencies. But it did not belong to Julian. It belonged to Caspian Vale. Caspian Vale was watching the interview from his studio, a converted barn on the outskirts of the city where he created the sculptures and installations that had made him famous in art circles. He was a tall man with kind eyes and hands permanently stained with clay and paint. He had been Julian's best friend since they were 7 years old, inseparable through childhood, college roommates. best man at each other's hypothetical weddings they had joked about as teenagers. But that friendship had fractured over the past few years, as Julian had become consumed by ambition and Caspian had watched him make increasingly questionable choices. When Julian's face appeared on the screen, denying Helifera's existence, Caspian felt something break inside his chest. He had met Helifera exactly twice. The first time was at her birth, when Julian had called him to the hospital in a panic, overwhelmed by sudden fatherhood. The second was on her 4th birthday, when Julian had secretly asked him to deliver a gift because Julian himself was too busy with a merger to attend. Both times, Caspian had seen something extraordinary in the child. Not just her unusual beauty or her precocious intelligence, but something else, something that shimmered around her like light through a prism. His phone rang. Mrs. Chen's voice was tight with worry as she explained what had happened. How Helifera had watched the interview. How the child was now locked in her room and would not come out. How the air in the apartment felt strange and charged, like before a lightning storm. "I'm coming," Caspian said simply, already grabbing his jacket. "Keep her safe. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He made it in 15, driving faster than he should have through the city streets. When Mrs. Chen opened the apartment door, her face was pale and drawn. The apartment itself felt different, heavy with something Caspian could not quite name. Every drawing on the walls was fluttering now, despite the windows being closed. And he could swear he saw one of Helifera's crayon butterflies actually move, its paper wings beating against the wall. "Hello, Farah," he called softly, kneeling outside her bedroom door. "It's Uncle Caspian. Can I come in?" There was a long silence. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, Daddy said, "I'm not real." Caspian closed his eyes, fury and sorrow warring in his chest. "Your daddy made a terrible mistake, sweetheart. But you are very, very real. You're the most real thing I know." The door opened slowly. Helofra stood there in her favorite purple pajamas, the ones covered in stars, her face wet with tears. In her arms, she clutched a stuffed rabbit that Julian had given her on her 3rd birthday, back when he still made time for such things. But what stopped Caspian's breath was the faint golden glow that seemed to emanate from the child herself, as if her sadness had ignited something luminous beneath her skin. "I have a secret," Helifera whispered, looking up at him with those impossibly green eyes. "Sometimes when I draw things, they try to become real. Sometimes when I'm really happy or really sad, everything gets all shimmery and weird. Am I a mistake, Uncle Caspian? Is that why Daddy doesn't want me?" Caspian gathered the child into his arms, holding her close as she cried against his shoulder. Over her head, he exchanged a long look with Mrs. Chen. They both knew this situation could not continue. A child could not live in hiding, denied by her own father, developing abilities that neither of them understood. "You're not a mistake," Caspian said firmly. "You're extraordinary. And I promise you, everything is going to be okay." But even as he made that promise, he knew he was about to do something that would change all of their lives forever. He pulled out his phone and called Julian's private number. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Caspian's jaw tightened as he left a message, his voice cold and controlled in a way Julian had never heard before. "Julian, it's Caspian. I just saw your interview. I'm at your daughter's apartment right now." "Your daughter, Julian? The one you just told 17 million people doesn't exist? The one who's crying herself sick because her father denied her on national television?" He paused, watching Helifera burrow deeper into his arms. "I'm taking her home with me, where she'd be loved and protected and told the truth. If you want to talk about this, you know where to find me. But if you come knocking, you better be ready to explain yourself. Because right now, I don't think I've ever been more ashamed to call someone my friend." He ended the call and looked down at Helifera. "How would you like to come stay with me for a while? I have a big house in the countryside with a garden and a studio where you can draw as much as you want, and there's someone there I'd like you to meet." Helifera looked up at him, hope flickering tentatively in her eyes like a candle flame in darkness. "Can I bring my drawings?" "All of them," Caspian promised. "Every single one." As Mrs. Chen helped pack a bag of Helifera's things, Caspian stood at the window, looking out at the glittering city below. Somewhere out there, Julian was probably celebrating the successful interview, convinced he had protected his empire. But he had no idea what he had just lost. And Caspian intended to make absolutely certain that when Julian finally realized his mistake, the path back to his daughter's heart would be long and difficult. If it existed at all, the drive to Caspian's countryside home took almost 2 hours. Halofra fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from crying, her face pressed against the window. As the city lights faded behind them and stars began to appear overhead, Caspian made a silent vow. He would give this child everything Julian had denied her: love, stability, truth, and the freedom to be exactly who she was, extraordinary abilities and all. Julian had thrown away the greatest gift life had given him, and Caspian would make sure Halofra knew every single day just how precious and real she truly was. The morning sun spilled through gauze curtains like liquid gold, warming the bedroom where Halofra slowly opened her eyes. For a confused moment, she forgot where she was. Then memory returned. The television interview, Uncle Caspian's gentle voice, the long drive through darkness, and finally arriving at this house that smelled of wood smoke and vanilla, she sat up in bed, taking in her surroundings properly for the first time. The room was painted a soft sage green, with wooden beams crossing the ceiling. A window seat overlooked a garden where morning glories climbed white trellises and a stone fountain burbled peacefully. But what caught her attention most were the art supplies carefully arranged on a desk near the window. Fresh sketchbooks, colored pencils in every hue imaginable, watercolors, and brushes of various sizes. A soft knock at the door made her turn. A woman entered, carrying a tray with pancakes, fresh strawberries, and a glass of milk. She had warm brown skin, curly dark hair, pulled back with a colorful scarf, and the kindest smile Halofra had ever seen. "Good morning, sweetheart," the woman said, her voice like honey. "I'm Nora. Caspian probably mentioned me last night, though I suspect you were too tired to really register much of anything. How did you sleep?" Halofra considered this question seriously. "I dreamed about butterflies. But they were real butterflies, not the scary kind of dreams." Nora set the tray on a small table and sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Real butterflies sound like a lovely dream. Would you like to eat breakfast here, or would you prefer to come downstairs? No pressure either way. This is your space now, and you get to decide how comfortable you want to be." Something in Nora's voice, in the way she offered choices rather than making demands, made Halofra's tight chest loosen slightly. "Can I see the garden after breakfast?" "Absolutely. In fact, that garden has been waiting for someone exactly like you. Caspian and I planted it, but we always felt like it needed a special person to really bring it to life." After breakfast, Nora led Halofra downstairs and outside. The house itself was beautiful in an entirely different way from the sleek, modern penthouse where Julian lived. This place felt alive, with exposed brick walls covered in ivy, mismatched furniture that somehow worked perfectly together, and artwork everywhere. But it was the garden that made Halofra gasp. It sprawled across nearly an acre with winding stone paths, hidden alcoves with benches, rose bushes in full bloom, and an ancient oak tree with a wooden swing hanging from its lowest branch. At the far end stood Caspian's studio, a converted barn with tall windows and a red door. "Want to see where the magic happens?" Caspian emerged from the studio, covered in clay dust, grinning. "Fair warning, it's messy." Inside the studio, Halofra's eyes went wide. Sculptures in various stages of completion filled the space: a bronze horse mid-gallop, a marble woman whose stone dress seemed to ripple in an invisible breeze, abstract pieces that looked like frozen music. But what drew Halofra was a workbench covered in smaller projects, whimsical creatures made from wire and papier-mâché. "I made those for fun," Caspian explained, watching her examine a dragon no bigger than her hand. "Sometimes the serious art needs a break, and I just create whatever makes me happy. They look like they want to fly away," Halofra said softly, touching the dragon's delicate wire wings. "Maybe they do," Caspian said thoughtfully. "Maybe all art wants to be free." Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Halofra began to heal. Not quickly, not without setbacks, but gradually, like a plant turning toward the sun. Caspian and Nora never pushed her to talk about Julian, never forced her to explain her feelings. Instead, they simply showed up day after day with patience and love. Nora taught her to bake, and they spent mornings in the warm kitchen, making bread that smelled like heaven. Caspian showed her basic sculpture techniques. She discovered she loved working with clay, how it felt alive and responsive under her small hands. They took long walks through the countryside, fed ducks at a nearby pond, and read stories before bed. But it was her drawing that truly flourished. Helofera drew constantly, filling sketchbook after sketchbook. And as she grew happier, as she learned to trust again, her abilities strengthened. One morning, Nora found her in the garden, surrounded by drawings of flowers. As she watched, one of the paper roses Helofera had drawn actually bloomed, its crayon petals unfurling in impossible three-dimensional beauty before dissolving back into 2 dimensions. Caspian Nora called quietly, not wanting to startle the child. "You need to see this." They watched together as Helofera, completely absorbed in her art, brought drawing after drawing to temporary life. A bird that fluttered its paper wings. A rabbit that hopped twice before becoming flat again. A rainbow that arced overhead in crayon colors before fading. "She has no idea how extraordinary she is," Caspian murmured. "Should we tell her?" Nora asked. "Let's let her discover it on her own terms. No pressure. No fear. Just wonder." Meanwhile, in the city, Julian's carefully constructed world was crumbling. The interview that was supposed to protect his reputation had backfired spectacularly. Anonymous sources began leaking information. Photos of Julian visiting Helofera's apartment. Copies of checks he had written for child support. Testimony from Mrs. Chen. The public outcry was fierce and immediate. But worse than the public relations disaster was the emptiness Julian felt. He had always been able to fill voids with work, with deals, with the next big achievement. But now, returning to his penthouse each night, he found himself walking into what used to be a guest room, where he had secretly kept a few of Helofera's drawings. They were still there, taped to the wall where no one ever saw them. A crayon portrait of a tall man labeled "My Daddy," house with hearts for windows, a family of 3 holding hands. Vivian had left him just as she had promised. "I could forgive the secret child," she had said coldly. "Rich men always have complications, but denying her on television? That's not complicated, Julian. That's cruel. And I don't date cruel men." The board of directors was pressuring him to step down. Stock prices had plummeted. His father Theodore called daily, his disappointment cutting deeper than any business loss. "You had one job," Theodore said during their last conversation, his voice heavy with disgust. "Protect the family name. Instead, you've made us a punchline. Worse, you've shown the world that a Brenner will throw away his own child to save face. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Julian did know. Late at night, alone in his penthouse, he knew exactly what he had done. He had betrayed the one person who had loved him unconditionally. And now Caspian had her, was giving her the life Julian had been too cowardly to provide. His breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon. He was leaving the office when he saw them, Caspian, Nora, and Helofera, at an outdoor cafe, laughing together over ice cream. Helofera looked different, lighter somehow, her hair catching the sun as she giggled at something Caspian said. She looked happy. Genuinely, completely happy. And Julian realized he could not remember ever making her laugh like that. He watched from across the street as Helofera stood up and showed them a drawing she had made on her napkin. As he watched, the napkin seemed to shimmer, and for just a moment, he could have sworn the crayon butterfly she had drawn actually moved. But then Nora said something, and Helofera crumpled the napkin, giggling, and the moment passed. Julian's phone rang. His assistant, another crisis at the company. He ignored it and kept watching his daughter, his best friend. And the woman who was becoming the mother Julian had never provided. And he made a decision. Back at the countryside house that evening, Helofera was in the garden, creating an elaborate chalk drawing on the stone path when Caspian's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, and his jaw tightened. "It's Julian," he told Nora quietly. "Are you going to answer?" Caspian watched Helofera, who was humming to herself as she drew, completely at peace. Not yet. Let him wait. Let him wonder. Let him feel a fraction of what Helofera felt when he denied her. But Julian did not wait. 2 days later, a sleek black car pulled up the long driveway to the countryside house. Julian stepped out, looking haggard and uncertain in a way Caspian had never seen. Gone was the confident mogul. In his place stood a man who had lost everything that mattered and knew it. Helifera was on the swing when she saw him. Her small hands gripped the ropes tighter, and the air around her began to shimmer with agitation. Every drawing visible through the studio windows started to flutter. Responding to her distress, Julian stopped walking, maintaining his distance. "Hello, Helifera," he said softly. "You look well." Helifera said nothing, just stared at him with those enormous green eyes. Caspian emerged from the house, positioning himself between Julian and the child. "You have exactly 5 minutes to explain why you're here before I call security." "I don't have security to call, and we both know it," Julian said tiredly. "But I understand your anger." "I deserve it." He looked past Caspian to Helifera. "I deserve all of it. I came to say that I made the worst mistake of my life. I came to say I'm sorry. And I came to ask if there's any way, any possible way, I might earn a chance to be your father again." The silence that followed was broken only by birdsong and the creak of the swing as Helifera slowly came to a stop. "Why?" The word came out small, but clear. "Why did you say I wasn't real?" Julian's face crumpled. "Because I was afraid. Because I thought protecting my company was more important than protecting you. Because I'm a coward who didn't deserve you then and doesn't deserve you now." "That's true," Helifera said simply. Around her, the shimmer intensified. "You hurt me? You made me think I was invisible." "I know. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make that right, if you'll let me." "She doesn't have to let you do anything," Caspian interjected. "She's finally happy here. Finally safe. You don't get to walk back in and disrupt that." "I know," Julian said, looking at his former best friend. "Which is why I'm not asking to take her back. I'm asking if I can be part of her life. In whatever way she's comfortable with. On her terms, not mine." Nora appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." "Hello, Faraz, sweetie. Why don't you come inside and wash up?" But Helifera was staring at Julian, and something in her expression was shifting. She slid off the swing and walked toward him slowly. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped. "I'm not invisible," she said firmly. "I'm real. And I'm special. Uncle Caspian says so. Aunt Nora says so. And even if you can't see it, I know it's true." "You're the most real thing in the world," Julian whispered. "And you're more special than I ever let myself admit." Helifera studied him for a long moment. Then she pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to him. "I drew this yesterday. Before I knew you were coming." Julian unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a picture of a man standing alone under a gray sky, rain falling around him. At the bottom, in careful crayon letters, she had written, "Everyone needs forgiveness sometimes." As Julian stared at the drawing, something impossible happened. A single crayon raindrop actually fell from the paper onto his hand, wet and real for just a moment before evaporating. He looked up at his daughter, wonder and fear mixing in his expression. "Helifera, how did you do that?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "It just happens when I feel things really strongly." "Are you scared of me now?" "No," Julian said immediately. "I'm amazed by you. I always have been. That's part of why I was so scared to claim you publicly. I was afraid people would see how extraordinary you are and take you away from me." "Ow." "But you took yourself away from me," Helifera pointed out with devastating childhood logic. "I did, and that was stupid and selfish and wrong." Julian knelt down to her eye level, not reaching out, just being present. "I don't expect you to forgive me today. Or tomorrow. Maybe not ever. But I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be better. Not the father I was, but the father you deserve." Helifera looked back at Caspian and Nora, who stood together on the porch, a united front of love and support. Then she looked at Julian again. "You can stay for dinner," she said finally. "But just tonight, and you have to help Aunt Nora make the salad. And you have to promise never to lie about me again." "I promise," Julian said, relief and gratitude washing over his face. "Never again. Not to anyone. Not for any reason." They walked toward the house together. Caspian pulled Julian aside briefly. "This doesn't make us okay," he said quietly. "You don't get our friendship back just because you remembered you have a daughter." "I know," Julian said, "and I don't expect your forgiveness either. But I'm hoping, eventually, we might find a way to be allies. For Helifera's sake, maybe," Caspian allowed. "But you'll have to earn every inch of that ground. And if you hurt her again, I won't let you near her. Legal father or not." That night, dinner was awkward but not hostile. Julian helped Nora in the kitchen, following her instructions for the salad with the kind of humble attention he never gave to anything. Helofera watched him carefully, still wary, but curious too. Over roasted chicken and vegetables, Julian told stories about his childhood friendship with Caspian. Stories that made everyone laugh despite themselves. When it was time for bed, Helofera surprised everyone by asking Julian if he wanted to see her room. He followed her upstairs, his heart in his throat, and stopped in the doorway at the sight of the art supplies, the cozy space. The obvious love that had gone into creating this sanctuary. Uncle Caspian set up the desk for me, Helofera said. And Aunt Nora painted the walls. They say I can stay here forever if I want. They're good people, Julian said. Better than me. Maybe, Helofera agreed. But maybe you can become better too. After Julian left, promising to call before visiting again, Helofera climbed into bed. Caspian and Nora both came to tuck her in, as they did every night. Are you okay? Nora asked gently. Helofera nodded. I think so. I'm still mad at him. But I think maybe he's really sorry. Is it okay to be both things at once? It's very okay, Caspian assured her. Feelings are complicated. You don't have to decide everything tonight, good Helofera said, yawning. Because I'm too tired to decide anything except that I'm glad I live here now. We're glad too, they said in unison. After they left, Helofera pulled out a sketchbook and drew one more picture before sleep claimed her. It showed 4 people, a tall man with kind eyes, a woman with curly hair and a warm smile, a little girl with light radiating from her hands, and another man standing slightly apart from the group but facing toward them. As if asking permission to join, she fell asleep before she could see the drawing shimmer and glow in the darkness. All 4 figures moving slightly as if breathing, as if alive, as if showing her a possible future where broken things could be mended and lost connections could be carefully, slowly rewoven into something new. 3 months passed in a rhythm of healing and growth. Helofera thrived in the countryside, her abilities becoming stronger and more controlled as she learned to trust the world again. Caspian taught her that her gift was nothing to fear, that creation itself was magic. Whether it took the form of sculpture, painting, or drawings that temporarily came to life. But the legal world does not care about healing. And Julian's father, Theodore, determined to restore the family name, had hired a team of attorneys who specialized in custody battles. The papers arrived on a Wednesday morning, delivered by a courier who looked uncomfortable handing them to Caspian. Nora read through them, her face growing pale. He's suing for full custody, she said quietly, not wanting Helofera to overhear from the garden where she was drawing. Theodore is using every legal resource they have. They're claiming Julian was under duress during the denial, that he's the biological father, with full parental rights, and that you have no legal standing as guardian. Caspian felt rage boil in his chest. He spent 3 months visiting once a week, playing the reformed father, and this whole time he was building a legal case. We don't know that Julian is behind this, Nora pointed out. The paperwork all comes from Theodore's attorneys. Maybe Julian doesn't even know. But Julian did know. That evening, he called Caspian directly, his voice tight with stress. I need you to listen, Julian said before Caspian could hang up. My father filed those papers without my permission. He's convinced this is about family legacy, about Brenner bloodlines, and corporate inheritance. But I told him no. I told him Helofera is happy where she is. And yet the papers exist, Caspian said coldly. Because Theodore has the resources to file them regardless of what I want. But I'm fighting him on this, Caspian? I've spent 3 months respecting Helofera's space, visiting on her terms, trying to earn back trust. I'm not going to destroy that now. Then withdraw the custody suit. I can't, not alone. Theodore has legal standing as Helofera's grandfather. But I can testify against it. I can stand up in court and say she belongs with you. If you'll let me. Caspian was silent for a long moment. Why would you do that? She's your daughter, because she's happy, Julian said simply. And her happiness matters more than my rights as a father. More than Theodore's legacy plans. More than anything. The custody hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In that time, Helofera's life filled with lawyers, social workers, and psychological evaluations. Through it all, Caspian and Nora tried to shield her from the stress, but she was too perceptive not to notice. Are they going to make me leave? She asked one night, her voice small in the darkness of her bedroom. Not if we have anything to say about it, Caspian promised. But there's going to be a meeting where a judge asks you questions. And you'll have to tell the truth about what you want. I want to stay here, Helifera said immediately. But I also want to keep seeing Daddy. Is that allowed? That's called shared custody, Nora explained gently. Where you live primarily in one place, but visit another, that might be what the judge decides. What if Grandfather Theodore makes the judge choose him? Then we fight, Caspian said firmly. We fight with everything we have. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold. The courtroom was smaller than Helifera expected, with wooden benches and a high judge's bench. Theodore Brenner sat on one side with his team of attorneys, looking every inch the powerful patriarch. Julian sat separately, his own lawyer beside him, its expression unreadable. The judge, a woman named Helena Pierce with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened carefully as each side presented their case. Theodore's attorneys painted a picture of Julian as a devoted father who had made one mistake under extreme pressure, a mistake he deeply regretted. They argued that Helifera belonged with her blood family. With access to the Brenner, fortune and legacy, Caspian's attorney countered with 3 months of documentation, school records showing Helifera's improvement, testimonials from teachers about her increased confidence, psychological evaluations praising the stable environment Caspian and Nora provided. Then Julian was called to testify. Mr. Brenner, Judge Pierce said, "You're the biological father. What is your position on custody?" Julian stood, and everyone in the courtroom leaned forward slightly. This was the moment that would define everything. Your Honor, Julian began, his voice steady but emotional. 3 months ago, I made the worst decision of my life. I denied my daughter on national television because I was afraid of losing my company, my reputation, my carefully constructed life. But in protecting those things, I lost the only thing that actually mattered, my daughter's trust. Theodore shifted in his seat, his face reddening. Caspian Vale and Nora Sinclair gave Helifera what I failed to provide: unconditional love, stability, and the freedom to be her extraordinary self. They asked nothing in return. They simply showed up, day after day, proving through actions what I had only offered in words. So you're agreeing to relinquish custody? Judge Pierce asked. I'm agreeing that primary custody should remain with Caspian and Nora with visitation rights for me. Rights I hope to earn and maintain by being the father Helifera deserves, not the one I was. Theodore stood abruptly. Your Honor, my son is clearly still under emotional duress. The Brenner family cannot allow our heir to be raised by strangers. They're not strangers, Julian said, turning to face his father. Caspian has been my best friend since we were 7, and he's been a better father to Helifera in 3 months than I was in 6 years. This is about legacy, Theodore insisted. About bloodline and inheritance. No, Julian said firmly. This is about a little girl who deserves to be happy. And if you can't see that, then maybe the Brenner legacy isn't worth preserving. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Pierce gavelled for silence. I'd like to speak to the child now, she said. Helifera, would you come forward, please? Helifera stood from where she had been sitting between Caspian and Nora. She looked tiny walking to the front of the courtroom, but she held her head high. In her hands, she carried a folder. Helifera, Judge Pierce said gently. Do you understand what's happening here? Yes, ma'am. Everyone is trying to decide where I should live. What do you want? Helifera opened her folder and pulled out a drawing. It showed the countryside house, the garden, Caspian's studio, and 3 figures clearly labeled Uncle Caspian, Aunt Nora, and me. I want to stay here, she said clearly. This is my home. And what about your father? The judge asked, gesturing to Julian. And your grandfather? Helifera pulled out a second drawing. This one showed a park with 2 figures on a bench, a tall man and a small girl. I want Daddy to visit, she said. I think he's trying to be better, and I want to give him a chance to prove it. But I don't want to live with him right now. Maybe someday, but not yet. She pulled out a third drawing, this one showing an elderly man, alone in a big house. I don't know Grandfather Theodore very well, she said honestly. He seems angry a lot. But maybe if he learned to be less angry, we could be friends too. Theodore's face softened slightly despite himself. Doc. Helifera, Judge Pierce said. "I've read in the reports that you have a very special talent with your artwork. Would you show me?" Helifera glanced at Caspian, who nodded encouragingly. She pulled out a blank piece of paper and a box of colored pencils. For 2 minutes, she drew intently, while the entire courtroom watched in silence. When she finished, she held up a picture of the courtroom itself, with Judge Pierce at the bench and everyone in their proper places. "It's very good," the judge said. "You have real talent." "Thank you," Helifera said. "But that's not the special part. The special part is this." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The drawing began to shimmer. And then, impossibly, the paper judge actually moved, bringing down a tiny gavel. The paper version of Caspian waved. The paper version of Julian smiled sadly. It lasted only a few seconds before everything flattened back to normal. But every person in that courtroom had seen it. Theodore stood again, his face a mixture of awe and fear. "Your Honor, this proves the child needs the resources only the Brenner family can provide. She's clearly gifted beyond normal parameters." "Actually," Caspian said, standing as well, "it proves she needs people who love her for who she is, not what she can do. Helifera has been developing this ability safely and naturally. She's not afraid of it anymore. She understands it's a part of her, like her green eyes or her sense of humor. We don't exploit it. We don't hide it. We simply accept it." Judge Pierce was quiet for a long time, studying Helifera, who stood calmly in the front of the courtroom, completely comfortable in her own skin. "Helifera," the judge said finally, "thank you for being so honest and brave. You may sit down now." After Helifera returned to her seat, Judge Pierce spent 10 minutes reviewing documents. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. "I have made my decision," she said finally. "Primary custody is awarded to Caspian Vale and Nora Sinclair, who will serve as legal guardians. Julian Brenner is granted visitation rights every other weekend and 1 evening per week, with the possibility of expanded custody if he demonstrates continued commitment over the next year. Theodore Brenner is granted supervised visits once per month, provided he attends family counseling to address his need to control outcomes rather than support relationships." Theodore looked ready to object, but Julian put a hand on his father's arm. "Furthermore," Judge Pierce continued, "I'm ordering that a trust fund be established by the Brenner family for Helifera's future education and needs. But the trustees shall be Caspian, Vale, and Nora Sinclair, ensuring the money is used in Helifera's best interests rather than as leverage for custody negotiations." She looked directly at Helifera. "Young lady, you have shown more wisdom and grace than most adults I encounter. I believe you're exactly where you need to be." When the gavel came down, Helifera launched herself into Caspian's arms, then Nora's, hugging them both tightly. Across the courtroom, Julian watched with tears running down his face. Not tears of loss, but of relief. His daughter was safe. His daughter was loved, and for the first time in his life, he had done the right thing. Even when it cost him everything outside the courthouse, Julian approached them carefully. "Helifera, can I talk to you for a moment?" She nodded and walked a few steps away with him while Caspian and Nora waited nearby. "I'm proud of you," Julian said quietly, "and I'm grateful to Caspian and Nora for giving you what I couldn't. I promise I'll be there every other weekend, every Wednesday evening, exactly like the judge said, and I'll keep working on being better." "Daddy," Helifera said, taking his hand, "thank you for telling the truth today. That was brave." "Not as brave as you," Julian said, kneeling down. "You're the bravest person I know." "Can I show you something?" Helifera pulled out her folder again and handed him a new drawing she had made during the judge's deliberation. It showed for people Caspian, Nora, Helifera, and Julian. They were standing in a circle, holding hands, all of them smiling. "This is what I hope we can be," she said. "Not a normal family, but a family that works in its own way." Julian held the drawing carefully, and as he looked at it, the paper figures moved slightly, their joined hands swinging as if they were actually standing in a circle together. When he looked up, amazed, Helifera was grinning. "It only works when I'm really happy," she explained. "And right now, I'm really happy." 6 months later, the arrangement had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Helifera lived primarily with Caspian and Nora, thriving in the countryside. She attended a small school where her teachers celebrated rather than feared her creativity, Her abilities continued to develop, controlled and beautiful. Julian visited faithfully, never missing a scheduled time. He brought art supplies, attended school plays, and slowly, carefully rebuilt the trust he had shattered. He was no longer the powerful mogul consumed by ambition. He had stepped back from his company, letting others run the daily operations while he figured out what actually mattered. Even Theodore made his monthly visits. And gradually, through counseling and time, he learned to see Helifera not as a legacy or an heir, but as a remarkable child who happened to be his granddaughter. One Sunday afternoon, they all gathered at the countryside house for Helifera's 7th birthday. The garden was decorated with lanterns and streamers. A cake sat on the outdoor table. It's covered with crayon-drawn flowers that actually swayed in an invisible breeze as the sun set and candles were lit. Helifera looked around at her family, unconventional and imperfect, but wholly hers. Caspian and Nora, who had given her a home. Julian, who was learning to be a father. Even Theodore, who had brought a telescope because he remembered her mentioning an interest in stars. "Make a wish," Nora said as they prepared to sing. But Helifera shook her head. "I don't need to wish for anything. Everything I wanted already came true." As they sang and celebrated, her drawings all around the garden came to life in small ways. Paper butterflies fluttered. Crayon birds sang silent songs. Sketched flowers bloomed and rebloomed. It was her gift, her joy made visible. Her happiness transforming the world around her in small but magical ways. And in that moment, everyone present understood that some families are born and some families are built. But the strongest families are chosen day after day. Through forgiveness and love, and the willingness to be better than you were yesterday, Julian watched his daughter laugh, surrounded by light both literal and metaphorical, and knew that losing her had been the thing that finally taught him how to truly find her, not as a possession or an obligation, but as a person worthy of respect, worthy of truth, worthy of every sacrifice. The stars came out overhead, and Helifera's drawing of the night sky on the garden wall actually twinkled with real starlight for just a moment before fading back to crayon. And everyone smiled, because in a world where a child's imagination could bring drawings to life, anything seemed possible, even redemption, even second chances, even love that had been broken finding a way to heal into something different, but equally beautiful. The end came not with drama, but with peace. With a little girl finally secure in the knowledge that she was real, she was seen, she was loved, and she was home.